Hi, everybody. Is this working okay? I'm a fish out of water here, out of my element, but I'm going to do my best. So I made a few notes so I don't stumble too badly. If I do, just give me an arm. I'm David Stern. There were a lot of pictures that Jeremy put of me up there. I'd like to start by just saying thank you to everybody for coming. And I know my father would have been overjoyed seeing all these faces and friends. And I think I'd also like to thank all of our readers, poets, and friends for coming tonight as well. And a big thank you to Anne-Marie for putting all of this together. Sorry, Anne-Marie, I broke your obscurity. And thank you to Jeremy for all the video and to Dylan for the audio. So just a few administrative notes. I'm going to offer a couple words, and then in the program, if each reader just makes their way up, I won't come back. There's one small adjustment tonight, which is that Roske is not here. He took ill. We wish him the best. He sent us a video recording, which we will play. But yeah. My father's biography was well known. In a few words, his struggle with obscurity, his late arrival, his deep learning, his connection to place, his authenticity as a writer, his interminable sense of discovery and hope. I'm the least here qualified to talk about his work. If I can offer anything, it's really more as a witness than as a critic. My family makes fun of me because I tell stories. Maybe too many. I don't know where that came from. And thinking about poetry and criticism, I couldn't help but to offer up one small story, which took place when I was 4 or 5 years old. And I was with my father and his old friend from Pittsburgh, Jack Gilbert. And they were arguing about poetry and about the merits of poetry and the subservience of criticism. And my father grabbed me, I was just little, and he said, "David," he said, "is Jack a poet or a critic?" And I looked, I studied, I took a step back, I looked a little harder, and my 4-year-old self, I said, "Critic." Whatever that was, I didn't know, and Jack was mortified. He was horrified, and he came to me pleading to say that, no, he was a poet, please. Could I reconsider? And I said, no, I was dug in. As for storytelling, as an architect, I was thinking, and I realized, I couldn't help but to think about a beautiful movie made by Nathaniel Kahn, Louis Kahn's son, called My Architect. He never knew his father, or barely knew him, and he went on a mission to uncover stories about his father, interviewing people, clients, friends, colleagues. And I thought that was really beautiful. And I realized that I'm sort of lucky. I don't have to search real hard for a lot of stories from my father, my poet. He was never diffident about sharing his stories. as we all know. We were witnesses, my sister and I, and a lot of people here, to the places, to the people, to the memories that were made and recorded. We got to watch as the world around us hopped into verse. Like most fathers and sons, our lives, his and mine, intersected during a very set period of years before I left home. And those years were formative for me and for him in different ways. My period is reflected in rejoicings, in lucky life, in the red coal, in paradise poems. And it's a gift I look back on, and I can see the things that mattered and what made it into his poems and what didn't. Now, Ross isn't here, so I had one for him because I couldn't help thinking the beautiful foreword that he wrote to my father's last book, I, with a shout out to Chase for all of her hard work in pulling that together. Ross sort of stumbled along, it seemed, with my father in the East End Temple, the Cosmos Diner, and it made me think back to my times rambling with my father. And I tried to limit the stories because there were a lot of them, but I remember thinking about all the crusty stone houses that we went through on the Delaware River. He dragged me through house after house. I remember distinctly walking across the broken glass in Camp Kilmer in Edison, New Jersey, which he wrote about. And just this morning, I thought about the time that I was riding shotgun down 42nd Street with him while he was recording titles of XXX movies for his play Father Guzman. And this is for my sister too. I remember my father and our life along the river in Robsville, Pennsylvania. I remember him in his brown beach jacket, his corncob pipe, half and half tobacco, Crabari Brothers Chianti. He seemed always to be writing, to be rolling words in his mouth, testing the sounds. I remember his blue chair, looking out over the river, filling the black and white notebooks he loved. And if I romanticize this time, it's because it took me years to see my father as vulnerable, to understand his angst. I couldn't comprehend his early poem, The Bite, when he portrays himself as the hare chasing the turtle. I always saw him as steadfast and obsessed with his mission. He would laugh and dance and joke, as we all know, until it came to poetry and he was deadly serious. Deadly serious. But I like to remember the laughing, the dancing, and I like to remember the singing, especially the singing. So here's a song about stories and memory from the red coal. The faces I love. Once and for all, I will lie down here like a dead man, letting the socialists walk over my face, letting the fascists crawl through my veins, letting the Krishnas poison me with their terrible saffron. Once and for all, I will lie here helpless and exhausted. I will let dishonor rise from me like steam and tears fall down on me like oily rain. In the end, my stillness will save me. In the end, the leopard will walk away from me in boredom and trot after something living, something violent and warm to excite him before his death. In the end, I will have my own chair. I will pull the blinds down and watch my nose and mouth in the blistered glass. I will look back in amazement at what I did and cry aloud for 2 more years, for 4 more years, just to remember the faces, just to recall the names, to put them back together, the names I can't forget, the faces I love. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. It's beautiful to be here. It's beautiful to see all of you here. Thank you, David. Thank you for remembering the singing and the laughing and the dancing. Thank you, Anne-Marie, for bringing us all here together to remember and celebrate. And thanks, everybody, for coming. I'm Alicia Ostriker, and the poem I decided to read here is I Remember Galileo. It's probably a favorite for many of you, too. I remember Galileo describing the mind as a piece of paper blown around by the wind, and I loved the sight of it sticking to a tree or jumping into the back seat of a car. And for years, I watched paper leap through my cities. But yesterday, I saw the mind was a squirrel caught crossing Route 80 between the wheels of a giant truck, dancing back and forth like a thin leaf, or a frightened string for only 2 seconds living on the white concrete before he got away. His life shortened by all that terror, his head jerking, his yellow teeth ground down to dust. It was the speed of the squirrel and his lowness to the ground, his great purpose and the alertness of his dancing that showed me the difference between him and paper. Paper will do in theory when there is time to sit back in a metal chair and study shadows. But for this life, I need a squirrel. His clawed feet spread, his whole soul quivering, the loud noise shaking him from head to tail. Oh, philosophical mind, oh, mind of paper, I need a squirrel. Finishing his wild dash across the highway, rushing up his green, uncovered. Wait a minute. I blew the last line. I'm going to go back a little bit. Oh, philosophical mind. Oh, mind of paper. I need a squirrel finishing his wild dash across the highway, rushing up his green, ungoverned hillside. So poetry is news that stays news. So today I want to thank Jerry for this particular poem and how very timely it is. For today, I feel my mind in this life and the mind of the Middle East, such as it is that squirrel. That squirrel and the front wheels of that murderous truck is Israel, and the back wheels are Hamas. And that truck has already run over thousands of Israelis and Palestinians. And why am I glad Jerry Stern chose as an adjective for the green hillside ungoverned? Well, I'm glad he chose every single word of that poem. But we end with the ungoverned hillside. It's a hillside and it's ungoverned. Why am I glad he chose that adjective? Because I'm not an anarchist. Jerry was much more an anarchist than I was ever. But I do believe human beings need governments. But today, my mind is brimming, as his mind often brimmed, with the realities of what governments do on that ungoverned hillside. That squirrel is the life energy. And Jerry himself, obviously identifying with the squirrel, is the life energy, just getting away with it. And here among us today, he is the life energy. But speaking of animals, I recently found myself thinking about the multitudinous animals in Jerry's poetry, how they animate his poems, from the dead opossum with the wind in its fur in Behaving Like a Jew way back in Lucky Life, all the way to the frogs decades later in Beauty Bright, whose pouches high school kids were supposed to dissect. Do you remember that? They avoided dissecting the frog's pouches, Stern recalls, thinking of the music on a summer night and how love songs may have gotten started there. And I read that and I thought, yes, I've heard that music of frogs on a summer night, and I believe that love songs might have gotten started there. Thank Jerry for telling me. Such chesed, a word that's Hebrew for loving kindness, and that runs all through Jerry's poems. Such compassion and affection has the poet Jerry Stern for his enormous menagerie of animals, birds, and little insects that you would think he had created them himself. Maybe he did. Maybe he is a God of compassion and affection, a God with a womb, since the Hebrew word for compassion, rachmanis, derives from the word for womb. For fun and curiosity, I've checked to see how many animals get mentioned in Beauty Bright, his almost most recent book. Here they are. Don't hold your breath. I won't hold mine. Eagles. A mule named Molly who was wise and loving above rubies. That's a biblical quote for a good woman who is above rubies. Stern expects you to know your Bible when you read him. You know, you better catch up. Several horses, birds that eat the garbage, 500,000 make-believe monkeys crossing the Delaware, goats, wild canaries, a green grasshopper, a donkey, poodles, and a cat in a poem called Leaves, stinking maggots and struggling bees, crows too shiny, a dead skunk and a capuchin monkey whose red hat is worn by the poet, some, dogs named Miriam and Moses, turtles jumping into water, birds plunging, some wolves, a goat, a froglet, ants on a corpse. Oh, ants on a corpse. Ants on a corpse. Packs of dogs and horses and bats on the 4th of July. A blue jay, a predator wasp dragging a huge insect. Flies and gnats. A dead wolf lying on its side and a bird eating the black intestines and the bird eaten. We're not done yet. I lost my rage while helping a beetle recover, the poet tells us, and goes on to celebrate the story of Nietzsche intervening between a coachman and the horse he was flogging, which supposedly led to Nietzsche's breakdown into madness, but leads Stern to the comparable compassions of Gogol and Dostoevsky, and then on to Grace Paley, protesting war on the White House lawn, and Daniel Berggrun breaking nuclear nose cones. Still not done, though. I mean, can you believe it? All those animals? Still not done. For still to come are a gorilla and leopard, a cat and dog, the orange cat I hate licking squirrel from his lips, and lastly, some talkative crows and a wasp. That's a lot of love. That's a lot of attention. That's a lot of affection. And, you know, even when Jerry says, and he often says he hates and he despises and he rants against, but what you feel is not only the energy, but the love pouring from him. And I haven't even mentioned Jerry drawing. He was a wonderful cartoonist. I haven't even mentioned Jerry singing, but thank you, David, for mentioning it. Jerry wearing a hat. You saw some hat photographs. I love Jerry wearing a hat in particular. Also, because my favorite Jewish joke my favorite Jewish joke is a joke that Jerry told, and probably he told it to a lot of people in this room. And it has a hat. And there's a Jewish grandmother, and and the grandmother is sitting with her little grandson on the shore. And the grandmother is sitting and the grandson is playing, and a big wave comes and picks up the little grandson and takes him out to sea. And the grandmother, she's horrified. She gets on her knees. She looks to heaven. She prays, "Oh God, I'll do anything. I'll keep kosher. I'll observe the holidays. I'll worship you forever. Dear God, please bring my little grandson back." She prays. So then the wave comes and brings the little grandson back and puts him on the shore at her knees. She's still on her knees. And she looks at him and she looks up at heaven and she says, "He had a hat." Thank you very much. Up next is Chase Berggrun.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chase. Oh, thank you, Ed. Can you hear me? Yes. My name is Chase Berggrun, and I'm so happy to be here tonight with all of you, with some beloved former teachers, with poets I admire and adore with all my heart. And I'm happy to be able to celebrate this miraculous poet to whom I owe so incredibly much, and to transition from Alicia's listing of Jerry's arc. Gerald Stern loved goats. He loved to sing constantly, to the amusement and chagrin both of everyone around him. He loved Anne-Marie. He loved his children and her children, his grandchildren. He was devoted to justice with a ferocity and rigor that made me swoon. He taught me how to make coffee properly, how to fry an egg. He loved the wild American simplicity of the hot dog. He refused to ever let me go home without taking a piece of fruit. He loved mockingbirds. We once spent an afternoon together lounging in chairs beside a pool in Miami Beach, primarily in quiet enjoyment of each other's presence, marveling at the mechanical sounds emanating from a small bird in a bush nearby that kept us company. Every once in a while, Jerry chirping in with a snippet of his own song, harmonizing. He loved me. I know this because he told me often, but also because of the great uncanny warmth I felt whenever I entered a room and greeted him. A warmth I still feel today. The memory of Jerry Stern is a magic spell, a comfort, a balm, a treasure I hold in my pocket, easily retrievable. He loved poems, as I do, with an unbridled fervor that brought me endless energy and delight. To spend time with Jerry Stern was to spend time with poems. Poetry bled into every conversation, every moment. He noticed things in the impeccable way of a great poet. A poet for whom, as Simone Weil writes, attention taken to its highest degree is the same thing as prayer. And he taught me how to pay attention, to attend to see distinctly, and most importantly, how to care for. I started working for Jerry in the summer of 2017. I got a call from Matthew Rohr, a former professor of mine and a former student of Jerry's, who knew I was desperate for a job, and asked me if I was familiar with the poetry of Gerald Stern. I had been reading Jerry since I was 14 years old. I met Jerry at his apartment. He gave me the job, and it permanently altered the course of my life. Working for Jerry was simultaneously wonderful, frustrating, hilarious, and intense. We typed up poems and spent useless time poring over spam emails. He thought we had to read every one. We watched old movies, and we talked about poetry constantly. He liked to read to me, sometimes interrupting whatever task he'd asked me to tackle for him, and I loved to listen. He once carved apples with his French Opinel knife while reading me poems as I built him a bookcase. He once read me a poem about cutting the Pope's toenails as I cut his toenails. And he might as well have been the Pope himself. The immutable fact of his love, at the very least, felt infallible to me. In the winter of 2018, I was at perhaps my lowest. I had just arrived in Miami to join Jerry as he snowbirded in Florida. This coincided with a melodramatic explosion in my own personal life, and my addiction, its hands already around my throat, began to pummel me into the concrete. As happens to many of us afflicted by alcohol, things came to a head, became untenable, physically, emotionally, and spiritually debilitating. I asked for help, and I received it for the next 2 months. In South Beach, my life became routinized. I woke up, I went to a recovery meeting, I had lunch with Jerry. I went to a recovery meeting, we edited poems and typed emails and watched films. I went to a recovery meeting, I went home every day for 2 months. Unable to sit for too long inside the dangerous anxiety and thirst screaming inside my own mind, I tended to Jerry. I talked him through his nervousness. I held his worries instead of my own. I sat with him. We argued about his taxes. We talked about poems. We listened to the birds sing. I did not drink. I want to say this plain. He saved my life. He offered me almost only warmth. And in the moments when he didn't, I found myself somehow capable of rerouting his upset or anxiety back toward a place of calm. He showed me parts of myself that I did not know existed. He taught me how to care for my own life by caring for the lives of others. He was unfathomably kind to me and made me remember the pure holiness inside a moment of kindness. He made me feel lucky to be alive when all I'd wanted was, for the longest time, was to be otherwise. When I began to come to terms with and embrace myself and my gender, he took me at my word when I told him who I was and saw me as I asked him to. He didn't always use the exact language or terminology, but I didn't need him to. I knew what he meant. He ended phone calls with, "I love you, man. I mean woman. I mean friend." The last time I saw him, I bid him farewell with my customary "Goodbye, Gerald." The last words he said to me were, "Goodbye, princess." Gerald Stern lived more life than any of us could ever possibly hope to deserve. I knew him for only a half decade of his more than 9.5. But those years were wider and more full than I could ever have hoped to have because of his presence. It's been nearly a year since his death, and I think of him every day. I close my eyes and hear his voice on the phone, calling me sweetheart, asking me to look things up on Wikipedia for him, asking me whether or not Joseph Campbell was a Nazi. Turns out, yes. Singing the athletic fight songs of universities he had no affiliation with. I hear his voice. I hear its power. Miraculously free of tics, so beautifully confident when reading his poems. And I feel so lucky that every time I miss him, I can meet him again in the poems he left us, his greatest gift, in each of which Gerald Stern is again so vibrantly and ecstatically living. I'd like to read one of my very favorites, a poem in which the act of intimate noticing becomes an encounter, a single moment that holds all of time. It's a poem that teaches me that sometimes prayer is answered in the asking, that the process of discovering the question lets me realize the strength I've been begging the divine for. A poem that teaches me how to hold the horrible and the gorgeous in the same weak palm, to recognize and struggle with and be grateful for these dissonances. It's called "Let Me Please Look Into My Window." Let me please look into my window on 103rd Street one more time, without crying, without tearing the satin, without touching the white face, without straightening the tie or crumpling the flower. Let me walk up Broadway past Saks, past the Melody Fruit Store, past Stein's Eyes, past the New Moon Inn, past the Olympia. Let me leave quietly by gate 29 and fall asleep as we pull away from the ramp into the tunnel. Let me wake up happy. Let me know where I am. Let me lie still as we turn left as we cross the water, as we leave the light. Thank you. And next we have Mark Hillringhouse.
I got to see a lot of my photographs on the slideshow going by. And I actually opened up a gallery in my website of all Jerry photographs that I've taken over 45 years. And so I'm sorting through them. And video, I have a lot of video too, Jerry, that I haven't cut, and I'm editing it. And maybe I'm trying to put it into a format so it has this transitions and stuff like that. But my relationship with Jerry started because I worked in a bookstore. I worked at Brentano's. Does anyone remember Brentano's? All right. And one day, and I wasn't a very good bookstore employee because I was always reading, and the bookstore manager would yell at me. So one day I'm in the basement unpacking shipments of books that were coming in. And I opened a box, and it was from Houghton Mifflin. It was Jerry Stern's Lucky Life. And I took out the book, and I read it while I was supposed to be working. I read the whole book. And that book affected me, and I just had to find out more about this poet. So I actually set up an interview, and through the APR, David Bonanno, and I drove down to Philadelphia. That's where I was going to meet Jerry, but I met him at a halfway point. He was going to take me to his house in Raubsville, and so I, leaving the offices of APR, driving up 611. Jerry met me, and then I followed him in his car. Of course, the car cut him off, and he yelled out the window at the driver. You can imagine what he yelled. And I could still hear his voice. But I wanted to read something in that interview which resonates with me now. And it was the last thing that Jerry said to me. And I was, at that age, I was very interested in craft, the craft of poetry. And I was trying to ask Jerry all these questions about the craft of poetry. And so I asked him about endings. And this is what he said. I've been working on a certain poem for about 6 or 7 months now, and I can't find the right last line for it. So the poem, in a sense, does not exist. The thought, the feeling isn't realized yet. The grand statement might not be grandiose. It might not be melodramatic. It may not even be beautiful. It may even be a letdown. It has to be aesthetically, that is, verbally and morally right, but not necessarily better than the rest of the poem. Everything depends on your signature, your breath, your person, maybe your rhythm, your peculiarity, your uniqueness, your crankiness, that thumbprint of yours. Poets are witnesses, living proofs of the uniqueness of the individual soul, of the unforgivable sadness of its passing, of its immortality. Their poems cry out against all imprisonment. The more living the poet, the more unbearable the death. The greater the poem, the more it ransoms. And that really resonates. I'm thinking about Jerry. The poem I'm going to read is at Bickford's. It was from Lucky Life. And, there's darkness in Jerry's poetry, but he's always leading in a way towards the light. I noticed that in a lot of his poems, and a sort of ending in a kind of rabbinical glow of some kind, at Bickford's. You should understand that I use my body now for everything, whereas formerly I kept it away from higher regions. My clothes are in a stack over against the orange pine cupboard, and my hair is lying in little piles on the kitchen floor. I am finally ready for the happiness I spent my youth arguing and fighting against. 20 years ago, walking on Broadway, I crashed into Shad-Eye and his Eagles. My great specialty was darkness then, and radiant sexual energy. Now, when light drips on me, I walk around without tears. Before long, I'm going to live again on $4 a day in the little blocks between 96th and 116th. I'm going to follow the thin line of obedience between George's restaurant and Salter's books. There is just so much feeling left in me for my old ghost, and I will spend it all in one last outburst of charity. I will give him money. I will listen to his poems. I will pity his marriage. After that, I will drift off again to Beckford's and spend my life in the cracked cups and the corn muffins. I will lose half my hatred at the round tables and let any beliefs that want to overtake me. On lucky afternoons, the sun will break through the thick glass and rest like a hand on my forehead. I will sit and read in my chair. I will wave from my window. Oh, thank you. Jill, our next reader, Jill Bialosky. Is she? There you are.
It's really lovely to be here. Thank you for having me, Anne-Marie and David. I'm going to begin by reading the poem, The Red Coal. It's one of my favorite Stern poems, a poem that spoke to me so deeply, I included it in a book I wrote called Poetry Will Save Your Life. The Red Coal. Sometimes I sit in my blue chair trying to remember what it was like in the spring of 1950 before the burning coal entered my life. I study my hand under the faucet, the left one below the grease line, consisting of 4 feminine angels and 1 crooked, broken, masculine one. And the right one lying on top of the white porcelain with skin wrinkled up like a chicken's beside the razor and the silver tap. I didn't live in Paris for nothing and walk with Jack Gilbert down the wide sidewalks thinking of Hart Crane and Apollinaire, and I didn't save the picture of the two of us moving through a crowd of stiff Frenchmen and put it beside the one of Pound and Williams, unless I wanted to see what coals had done to their lives too. I say it with vast affection, wanting desperately to know what the two of them talked about when they lived in Pennsylvania and what they talked about at St. Elizabeth 50 years later, looking into the sun, 40,000 wrinkles between them, the suffering finally taking over their lives. I think of Gilbert all the time now, what we said on our long walks in Pittsburgh, how lucky we were to live in New York, how strange his great fame was and my obscurity, how we now carry the future with us, knowing every small vein and every elaboration. The coal has taken over. The red coal is burning between us, and we are at its mercy, as if a power is finally dominating the two of us, as if we're huddled up watching the black smoke and the ashes, as if knowledge is what we needed, and now we have that knowledge. Now we have that knowledge. The tears are different, though I hate to speak for him. The tears are what we bring back to the darkness, what we are left with after our own escape, what all along the red coal had in store for us as we moved softly, either whistling or singing, either listening or reasoning on the gray sidewalks in the green ocean, in the cars and the kitchens and the bookstores, in the crowded restaurants, in the empty woods and libraries. The Red Coal recounts, as you know, a story of two poets strolling through the streets of Paris, talking about their poetic predecessors, Hart Crane and Apollinaire, remembering the time when they were young and intellectual, attempting to make a life through poetry. One poet has ostensibly achieved more success than another poet, but I'm not sure that's what the poem is mostly about. It documents, for me, that burning thing inside us, whether it is a passion for poetry or art or medicine or law or being a construction worker or a chef. The burning coal is that thing we must find in life, our calling. So, like a burning hot red coal, Gerald Stern entered my life when I was a graduate student studying poetry at the University of Iowa Writers' Workshop in 1981, the year that Jerry published his collection, The Red Coal. Maybe because many of us in the program were in our early 20s, Jerry, and I think you would like this, was like an avuncular uncle, presiding over our classroom with his passionate and infectious joy and laughter. Yes, we've heard it, his singing and dancing, his warmth and his love, reading us poems, sometimes his own, other times poets he admired, waving his arms and swaying side to side as he spoke, as if he were the embodiment not only of a poet prophet, but also for me, a rabbi. What did he teach me in workshop as a young student through his poems? To take risks, unleash passion, to not be afraid of darkness, and that in darkness there is light and abundancy. And those are the qualities I see in his poems. To embody the red coal and make it burn. He was a mentor and a friend, and later, ironically, I became his editor at Norton. I owe it to Carol Hawk Smith, who first brought Jerry to the house with his 1992 volume, Bread Without Sugar. In 1998, Jerry won the National Book Award for this time new and selected poems. After the great Carol Smith passed away, I became Jerry's editor at Norton, and we published 5 books together, beginning with early collected poems. In 2000, and we worked on, 5 books together to his most recent, Blessed as We Were, new and selected poems. And I like that bookend of his early collected, which I revere, and then his most recent, new and selected. It was a privilege and honor and actually a gas to be Jerry's editor. The problem was figuring out how to end our phone conversations and meetings in my office, as he was such an engaging and interested conversationalist. He always asked me about my family, about my son, about my own poems, and with such great interest and love. And also, he wasn't afraid of a little gossip to spice up my day. Jerry published 11 collections with Norton, and his work has been one of the cornerstones of the Norton list. Of all the books I worked on with Jerry, the one that meant the most to me was the first book, The Early Collected. The poems in this book are tremendous. They roar, they soar, they knock me down and gather me back up. Jerry could turn anything, any moment into a poem. Just preview his astonishing body of work in the table of contents of these 2 big volumes I have mentioned. Perhaps that is why he was so prolific. And I'm still thinking there may be another 100, 200 more poems stored away somewhere. He was a master poet whose poems, psalms, and songs spoke to the overlooked and neglected, to the troubled and turbulent aspects of humanity, to the joys, triumphs, and quirks of living. Jerry, your work will be remembered, and I will continue to return to your poems again and again. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And now we have the beloved Toi Derricotte.
I want to thank Jerry for all I learned about friendship by being friends with him. Jerry's friendship was one of the most meaningful, most fun, and most like a poem friendships ever in my entire life. I met Jerry in the mid-70s. Lucky Life was just about to be published. He came to a few meetings of a group of baby poets that were starting to get together in New Jersey called Poets and Writers of New Jersey. And most of us were poets in the school, as Jerry was at the time, and for a long time after. And we had a read around, and he read one of his poems, and of course everybody in the room knew immediately he was a genius. And I just can't imagine what he saw in me, who had never published a poem at the time, to sort of seek out a friendship, because God knows I never would have thought I was worthy. But he came over to me and we started talking, and he never used his ego to push me around. Yeah, he had some ego, it's true, but I didn't get pushed around with it, ever. And I love you, Jerry. I'd like to read one poem that I think says a lot of the things I want to say about friendship, about love, and about being worthy to be a poet. And it's a poem in a book called A Tribute to Gerald Stern, and it's by Anne Marie Macari. Thanks, Jerry. I love you. The Changing Coat. When I wake up, heart up my throat, a fear taste, getting ready for the changing skin. Your hat on the knob of the banister, tilted. You ask, why are you holding up your head with your hand? I'm tired, stripped down. Maybe I passed one of my deaths getting ready for the changing skin. Sometimes, love, I can be your sister, dead, come to see you in her changing skin. Tortoiseshell eyes, your gravel and moss. And you can be my brother, dead, saying, I never meant to hurt anyone. We're looking across the table. It's a field, long, spread out, pale. The ground's icy. We're wearing our new coats, and we've passed one or more of our deaths along the way. There's no afterlife. It's the same life. And when we remember that, we pull close our changing coats. We tilt toward each other. The ground is softer than I thought. Our foreheads touch.
I'm actually very sorry to follow that. I feel I can't. I'm Lynn Emanuel. I have a few extemporaneous remarks to make, which is that I never recognized the city of Pittsburgh in Jerry's poems. I never met Jack Gilbert. I didn't know him. My city was not Jerry's. It was filled with powerful poems about working in a glass factory or a mill. It was a world of labor and poetry. And I just have to say that I didn't know a single woman who was a poet for years. I'm going to just segue over to, I met Jerry face to face across a volleyball net. In my imagination, he's wearing shorts. I can't believe that he was. Okay. In beautiful, dirty Pittsburgh, in a park named for the murderous melons. But this is before that. I first met Jerry in the best way I think you can meet a writer, in his books. It was the 70s. Jeff, my husband, and I had been living and studying in New York. He was ABD at Columbia. I was studying with Adrienne Rich at City College. We were in our 20s, not married yet. And we referred to ourselves as, and every word here is capitalized, the Upper West Side Jewish intellectual couple. But the 70s was also to be the beginning of my exile to Pittsburgh, where at night, for amusement, Jeff and I would park on a little dark bridge and stare into the scorching interior of a mill to watch the pigs, glowing blocks of red steel, come off an assembly line. And every week, the mills would be cleaned. In my memory, it was a Thursday. And the smell of sulfur absolutely blanketed every household. It came in the windows. It was everywhere. Lucky Life was published only a few years after that exile had begun. It was a New York book. To me, it talked like New York. It was a book of assertions, fast-paced, taking note of, but not dwelling on. It didn't mull. It leapt forth. It was skeptical and earnest, ranting and full of energy. Moreover, Lucky Life was, I thought, mostly an Upper West Side book. The little blocks between 96th and 116th was where we lived. We went to Salter's Books. We went to the Olympia. Jerry says, "Don't go to California yet. Come with me to Stanley's and spend your life weeping in the small park on 106th Street." The first and last lines of Basho's famous haiku, "In Kyoto, I long for Kyoto." In Lucky Life, Jerry was as homesick for New York as I was. And I recognized in my homesickness that it could be a life's work. This poem is in Paradise Poems, and you could miss it, but it is a love poem. Kissing Stieglitz goodbye. Every city in America is approached through a work of art, usually a bridge, but sometimes a road that curves underneath or drops down from the sky. Pittsburgh has a tunnel, you don't know it, that takes you through the rivers and under the burning hills. I went there to cry in the woods or carry my heavy bicycle through fire and flood. Some have little parks. San Francisco has a park. Albuquerque is beautiful from a distance. It is purple at 5 in the evening. And New York is Egyptian, especially from the little rise on the hill at 14C. It has 12 entrances, like the body of Jesus. And Easton, where I lived, had 2 small floating bridges in front of it that brought me in and out. I said goodbye to them both when I was 57. I am reading Joseph Wood Crouch again, the second time. I love how he lived in the desert. I'm looking at the skull of Georgia O'Keeffe. I'm kissing Stieglitz goodbye. He was a city. Stieglitz was truly a city in every sense of the word. He wore a library across his chest. He had a church on his knees. I am kissing him goodbye. He was, for me, the last true city. After him, there were only overpasses and shopping centers, little enclaves here and there, a skyscraper with nothing near it, maybe a meaningless turf where whores couldn't even walk, where nobody sits, where nobody either lies or runs, either that or some pure desert, a lizard under a boojum, a flower sucking the water out of a rock. What is the life of sadness worth? The bookstore's lost, the drugstore's buried, a man with a stick turning the bricks up, numbering the shards, dream 21, dream 22. I left with a glass of tears, a little artistic vial. I put it in my leather pockets next to my flask of scotch and my golden knife and my keys, my joyful poems and my T-shirts. Stieglitz is there beside his famous number. There is smoke and fire above his head. Some bow-legged painter is whispering in his ear. Some lady in waiting is taking down his words. I'm kissing Stieglitz goodbye. My arms are wrapped around him. His photos are making me cry. We're walking down Fifth Avenue. We're looking for a pencil. There is a girl standing against a wall. I'm shaking now when I think of her. There are 2 buildings. One is in blackness. There is a dying poplar. There is a light on the meadow. There is a man on a sagging porch. I would have believed in everything. Thank you. Kimiko Hahn.
Thank you, David and Anne-Marie and all the poets. It's like a big love fest here. I have to say that I am really envious of all the words and all the stories that people have been telling. I did not know Jerry for as long as most of you here, and I am envious. I was what Toi Derricotte called a baby poet when I met the trickster statesman at poetry readings and conferences, and I fell in love with Jerry and Anne-Marie, and my husband Gerald and I would have the good luck to hang out with them at our house and their house and listen to Jerry sing. If you don't know his last book, which is entitled with the pronoun I, or you could also say the letter I as in Isaiah, please read it. It is a book-length vortex. And that's Jerry, a vortex, a giving vortex. I'm going to read Waving Goodbye. I wanted to know what it was like before we had voices and before we had bare fingers and before we had minds to move us through our actions and tears to help us over our feelings. So I drove my daughter through the snow to meet her friend and filled her car with suitcases and hugged her as an animal would, pressing my forehead against her, walking in circles, moaning, touching her cheek, and turned my head after them as an animal would, watching helplessly as they drove over the ruts, her smiling face and her small hand just visible over the giant pillows and coat hangers as they made their turn into the empty highway. Thank you. And now you will hear from Sharon Olds.
Oh my, oh my. Thank you. Thank you to everyone who has opened our hearts today. I'm beyond words and looking forward to hearing from Eddie. And I'm going to read this poem by Gerald Stern called The Dog. What was I doing with my white teeth exposed like that on the side of the road? I don't know. And I don't know why I lay beside the sewer so that the lover of dead things could come back with his pencil sharpened and his piece of white paper. I was there for a good 2 hours, whistling dirges, shrieking a little, terrifying hearts with my whimpering cries before I died by pulling the one leg up and stiffening. There is a look we have with the hair of the chin curled in midair. There is a look with the belly stopped in the midst of its greed. The lover of dead things stoops to feel me. His hand is shaking. I know his mouth is open and his glasses are slipping. I think his pencil must be jerking and the terror of smell and sight is overtaking him. I know he has that terrified, faraway look that death brings. He is contemplating. I want him to touch my forehead once and rub my muzzle before he lifts me up and throws me into that little valley. I hope he doesn't use his shoe for fear of touching me. I know or used to know the grasses down there. I think I knew 100 smells. I hope the dog's way doesn't overtake him. One quick push, barely that, and the mind freed, something else, some other thing to take its place. Great heart, great human heart. Keep loving me as you lift me. Give me your tears, great loving stranger. Remember the death of dogs. Forgive the yapping, forgive the shitting. Let there be pity. Give me your pity. How could there be enough? I have given my life for this. Emotion has ruined me. Oh, lover, I have exchanged my wildness, little tricks with the mouth and feet, with the tail. My tongue is a parrot's. I am a rampant horse. I am a lion. I wait for the cookie. I snap my teeth as you have taught me, oh, distant and brilliant and lonely.
Jerry was like an older brother to me. I love his poetry for its ferocious compassion, its comic obsessiveness and wild flights of fancy, its Whitmanian chutzpah and elegiac tenderness, its deep reverence for life. Many of his poems begin in the ruins, in secondhand shops and abandoned city lots, in the waste places of nature. He was committed to the lost and forgotten, the defeated, the failed. His poems set out to save both a personal and a historical past from forgetfulness, to rescue it from namelessness and oblivion. "48 years ago, I moved to Philadelphia to go to graduate school and applied for a job in Pennsylvania Poets in the Schools. Someone named John Hesselbein called me and said that I had to interview with a poet named Gerald Stern. His wife was head of the Girl Scouts, and he said if the poetry thing didn't work out, I could work for her, which was a bit alarming. Gerald Stern decided to interview me at Horn and Hard Arts in downtown Philadelphia. He was twice my age. He was very dapper, but all his clothes came from goodwill. He was singing in line at Horn and Hard Arts, and then he left me to pay for the coffee. We sat down at a table. He said, "You wrote a poem about salt. I wrote a poem about salt. You're hired." I said, "This is wrong. I have a lot of ideas about poetry. You should ask me about them." He said, "No, I don't want to hear about those." He said, "Have you ever been to the Pine Barrens of New Jersey? I've written a book called The Pineys." And I said, "This is inappropriate. I have pedagogical theories about poetry. I have a lot of thoughts about teaching poetry to children, and you should ask me about them." And he said, "Look, do you want this job or not?" And I said, "I do." And he said, "Then be quiet. I'm trying to tell you something about the Pineys." And I was hired. And then he invited me to Harrisburg for a training session. My roommate was Tom Lux, who became a lifelong friend. And then Jerry invited me to Robsville to stay with him for my first teaching job. And he taught me how to teach. He had a bad back and he was moving between the bathtub and his bed. And he was reading me his new poems. So far, he had published Rejoicings. And these were the poems that we'd heard tonight from Lucky Life. I've sometimes missed what was going on right in front of me, but I understood right away that something fantastic, something extraordinary, something great, something wonderful in my life was happening right in front of me, that this person was writing the great poems of our time. Jerry's poems begin in failure. They begin in loss. They begin in a sense that he's middle-aged and life has come to nothing. They're already looking back with wonder and grief. That's the poem of At Bigford's. That's Let Me Please Look Into My Window. That's I Remember Galileo. This is all gone by, and he's recording it and remembering it. We began talking about poetry then, and we never stopped. It was one of the great friendships of my life. Gerald Stern, my dear beloved older brother, was a romantic with a sense of humor, an Orphic voice living inside of history, a sometimes comic, sometimes tragic visionary, crying out against imprisonment and shame, singing of loneliness and rejuvenation, dreaming of social justice and community. I think of him as an ecstatic Maimonides who wrote his own idiosyncratic guide for the perplexed, converting our losses, transforming death and sadness into beautiful singing. I believe this is his greatest poem, The Dancing. In all these rotten shops, in all this broken furniture and wrinkled ties and baseball trophies and coffee pots, I've never seen a post-war Philco with the automatic eye, nor heard Ravel's Bolero the way I did in 1945 in that tiny living room on Beechwood Boulevard, nor danced as I did then, my knives all flashing, my hair all streaming, my mother red with laughter, my father cupping his left hand under his armpit, dancing the dance of old Ukraine, the sound of his skin half drum, half fart, the world at last a meadow, the three of us whirling and singing, the three of us screaming and falling as if we were dying, as if we could never stop. In 1945, in Pittsburgh, beautiful, filthy Pittsburgh, home of the evil melons, 5,000 miles away from the other dancing in Poland and Germany. O God of mercy, O wild God. Thank you.
Hey everyone, this is Ross. I wish I could be there with you, but I wanted to offer this to join with you all in our love and memory of Jerry, being with Jerry still. Dear Jerry, you'll be glad to know, or I think you will anyway, that I'm drinking my coffee this morning in a glass, probably an 8-ounce glass, like the ones you had in your kitchen in Lambertville, in which time to time we drink tea from, in the old way, you'd say. I'm drinking it in honor of you, I'm saying, which is a phrase I suspect I've said many times, but have never really heard, in honor of you. I suspect I mean in remembrance or in tribute, or perhaps more accurately, as a way of bringing you closer. How often when we eat, Stephanie holds up the plate or the bowl or the cup or points to it or takes a sip from it and says, "This is Jerry's." Or sometimes she cuts it down to Jerry's. Same goes for a few of your shirts I inherited. How it seemed to tickle you that as your body, I guess, was getting smaller, you were able to bestow upon us, what no longer fit. In this case, about 4 long-sleeved shirts, one of them my only white button-down, sort of a sexy shirt, to be honest, which I only wear on special occasions when I know there will be no coffee or tomato sauce, and which, like the others, has a print or stamp or something of your name on the collar, Stern. There's also the wool sweater I think Stephanie must have at some point taken. I can remember her wearing it sometimes when she'd be working for you, transcribing your poems or helping you edit some. She rolled up the sleeves, which I don't, and I think you'd like to know that sweater is more whole now than sweater. You'd probably say get rid of it, though I suspect you'd also laugh at the weird devotion wearing it is. Steffi and I have also found ourselves these past months, in addition to reading over your books of poems and essays, at least one of which is always in one of the stacks around the bed, in addition to smiling at that photo of you on the wall, and a few other things, watching some of your readings on YouTube. There's one on there of you reading for the Friends of the Scranton Public Library, maybe Lackawanna Community College. I wonder if you even remember this reading, where we calculated that you were probably in your early 60s, or just about, though you seemed much younger than that, in a way. Reading from Father Guzman, kind of preaching, really, as you sometimes did. And periodically in that one, instructing the students, for many of whom this was probably a first poetry reading, with patience and humor and some self-deprecation, on how to be at a poetry reading. A kid comes in late at some point and you kind of greet him by grasping him by the wrist. Remember how you did that, Jerry? Grasping us by the wrist as a way of saying, welcome, as a way of saying, let me share this with you, as a way of saying, well done. Your tick is a little bit there, and watching you, I think, oh, everyone I love has some kind of a tick. Or reading a couple poems at the Dodge Poetry Festival in 2006 out at Waterloo Village, the beautiful Haba days, when your voice had become more sonorous, when I would say you'd become more attuned to the audience. You'd become less of a bombaster, less of a declaimer, and more of a conductor, playing or conjuring really the silences, the laughter, the rhythm of all those bodies breathing together, which a reading really is, the conduction of all our bodies breathing together. Or the one when I think you were part of a cohort being inducted into the Academy of Arts and Humanities, and you explained you're only going to read for 5 minutes, 4 very short poems with nothing in between. So you'll miss half my presentation, you say, as a way of saying fuck you to the Academy, which you were very good at doing, figuring out a way of saying fuck you, which you most often did simply by saying fuck you. But you were being inducted, and so some couth was needed. Some passive-aggressive couth, I guess, which I kind of suspect explains somewhat how long you ruffled and riffled your papers before finding your first poem. Or the one where you sing at Smith College to raucous applause. Did you ever not sing at a reading? Did you ever not mourn? Did you ever not sorrow the forgotten, the abused? Did you ever not celebrate? We've been missing you, is another way of saying it. We miss you. Your interjections and curses and outbursts and songs, your rants and the way you stood at your kitchen table reading over a poem you were working on, or a book you were reading, or even just a bill, some stupid bill or other. We miss your stories over the table on your back porch on sunny days, the redbud tree looking over us, people passing by on the towpath, how you seemed to love how much we loved those stories, how you never tired of retelling them when we asked. We miss how much you loved to talk shit from your porch to not quite, but almost whoever went by. You were like my Nana that way. We miss how you were more infatuated with talking on the telephone than any person not a teenager in the 1970s and 80s than anyone who has ever lived. And how not infrequently when I'd arrive for a visit, and if you weren't standing at the kitchen table smiling and waving me in, you'd be on the phone, cross-legged on that low antique chair, from which you would almost immediately put that phone in my hand as a way of introducing me to whoever you were talking to. as a way, really, of gathering up all your loves, I suspect. As a way, I suspect, of reminding us you all might need each other. We all need each other. You were like my Aunt Butter that way. We miss your laughter, how you loved a dirty joke, how you made yourself laugh so hard sometimes. A few times I can remember it. There might have been a little wine. It might have been at one of your birthday parties. You would kind of wince in pain, in delight. We miss your hands, how you held a pencil, a spoon, how you held your hand to scratch your face. We miss your glasses. We miss how your lips sometimes seem to be kissing the air, little love pecks to the air. We miss your loyalty and your irascibility and how you fucking hated being called young man by young people and how you fucking hated people in their 60s and 70s. God forbid their 50s or 40s complaining about being old, and how you hated the way old people are sometimes spoken to as children. And the one time I watched as that was happening to you in a rehab center in Jersey, and well, let's just say it didn't happen again. And what your hands looked like putting a grape in your mouth, or pouring a tea kettle, or holding a cane, or turning the pages of a book, or drawing a cartoon on a napkin and envelope. We miss how you never stopped learning, how you never stopped reading, how you reread constantly. We miss your enthusiasm, your rage, your heartbreak, how as much as you wanted to be loved, you didn't seem to be that concerned with being liked. How you changed, we miss too. And how you could laugh at yourself and sometimes cringe. How much you knew and how much you didn't, and how wrong you could sometimes be, and how fragile. How much you were like us, we miss. And how you loved the sweet after lunch, and how you loved a diner, and your ballpoint pens and composition books and legal pads, and how you were always glad for me to go in the back room upstairs facing west while you and Stephanie were working so I could take a nap. You were like my mother that way, sharing your house, sharing your food. Do you need anything? You were our mothers and fathers that way. And how you never seemed to tire of the canal, or the river, or the flowers, or the scents, or the light. Oh, maybe that's what it is, Jerry, most of all that. How you never quite seem to tire of the light. I'm going to read this poem of Jerry's. I was going to read an essay or part of an essay, but so let me just say, we should all know that Jerry's, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most beautiful essayists we have. So I just want to say that, but I wanted, in the interest of time and in the interest of, goddamn, I love this poem and it feels right. It's called Waving Goodbye by Gerald Stern. I wanted to know what it was like before we had voices and before we had bare fingers and before we had minds to move us through our actions and tears to help us over our feelings. So I drove my daughter through the snow to meet her friend and filled her car with suitcases and hugged her as an animal would, pressing my forehead against her, walking in circles, moaning, touching her cheek, and turned my head after them as an animal would, watching helplessly as they drove over the ruts, her smiling face and her small hand just visible over the giant pillows and coat hangers as they made their turn into the empty highway. Thanks, everyone. It's good to be with you.
Thank you, everybody. This was really, really wonderful to hear everybody talk and everybody read. And it was great seeing Toi and Ross on video. There's some snacks in the back. I encourage you all to eat something. And we actually have plenty of time, so there's no hurry to run off. Thank you. Thank you.